She never expected to hear the word worthless again. Not like that. Not in front of a room full of strangers. But what her ex didn't know was that the man sitting behind her, quietly finishing his drink, was the last person in the city anyone should have said that word around. The restaurant buzzed with Friday night energy, the kind that made everything feel louder. Laughter bouncing off glass walls, silverware clinking against plates, waiters weaving through tight spaces with practiced ease. But for Emily Carter, the noise felt distant, muffled by the sudden tension tightening in her chest as she approached table 14 with a tray balanced carefully in her hands. She had seen his name on the reservation but hoped, stupidly, desperately, that it was someone else. Someone with the same name. Someone who wouldn't look at her like he used to. Like she was something to control, something to diminish, something to own. But hope had never been her strongest defense. And the moment she stopped beside the table and met Jason Miller's eyes, she knew exactly how this was going to go. He leaned back in his chair slowly, deliberately, as if savoring the moment, his lips curling into that familiar half-smile that had once made her feel special and now made her feel small. And his friends, two men she didn't recognize but immediately disliked, followed his gaze, their expressions shifting from casual curiosity to entertained interest as they realized who she was. Well, Jason said, loud enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. Look who it is. Emily forced her shoulders to stay straight, forced her voice to remain steady even as her pulse quickened. Good evening. I'll be taking care of your table tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink? It was the script she had perfected over months, the shield she wore every shift. But Jason wasn't interested in playing along. Not tonight. Not with an audience. You still working here? He asked, eyebrows lifting in exaggerated surprise. That's wow. One of his friends chuckled under his breath, and Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. But she didn't react. She couldn't afford to. Not here. Not on the floor. What can I get you? She repeated, tighter this time, hoping he would just order. Just let her walk away. Just let this end quickly. But Jason leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel more personal, while still carrying far enough to be heard. I figured you'd at least try to do something with your life after we broke up, he said. But I guess some people just stay exactly where they belong. The words hit harder than they should have, not because they were new, but because they weren't, because she had heard versions of them before in quieter rooms, behind closed doors, when no one else was around to hear them. And a part of her hated that they still had power over her. I'm just doing my job, she said, keeping her tone neutral. But Jason wasn't finished. Yeah, he said, glancing around at the restaurant. And what a job it is. His friend laughed again, louder this time. And now more people were looking, not openly staring, but noticing, sensing something uncomfortable unfolding. You used to talk about big dreams, Jason continued, shaking his head like he was disappointed. Art, design, whatever it was, remember that? Guess that didn't work out. Emily's grip tightened slightly on the tray, her knuckles whitening. Because she did remember. She remembered every conversation, every plan, every version of herself she had slowly let go of, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but this version. The one standing here being judged, being reduced, being watched. I'll give you a few minutes to look at the menu, she said, starting to turn away. But Jason's voice stopped her cold. No, stay, he said, and there was something in his tone, something sharper, more commanding, that made her hesitate despite herself. I'm not done. He leaned back again, studying her like she was a problem he had already solved. You know what your issue always was? He asked, not waiting for an answer. No ambition, no confidence, just nothing. He snapped his fingers lightly, as if trying to recall a word, and then said it, clearly, deliberately, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. Worthless. The words seemed to echo, even though the restaurant noise continued around them, and for a second, everything inside Emily went still, like her body didn't know how to react, like it had heard something it wasn't supposed to hear again. Not here, not now. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred slightly at the edges, and she hated that her first instinct wasn't anger, but recognition, because some part of her still believed it, still carried it, still hadn't let it go. One of Jason's friends shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the surrounding tables, sensing that maybe this had gone too far, but Jason didn't notice or didn't care. "You should thank me, honestly," he went on, his tone almost casual now, as if he were offering helpful advice. "I got out before you dragged me down with you." Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe, to stay present, to not let the past pull her under in front of all these people. She could feel eyes on her now, not just from curiosity, but from that quiet kind of sympathy that somehow felt worse, because it confirmed what was happening, confirmed that she was the one being pitted, the one being talked down to, the one being exposed. And she hated that feeling more than anything. "Sir," she said, her voice barely steady, "I need to take care of my other tables." But Jason leaned in one last time, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel like a final blow. "Face it, Emily," he said. "This is all you're ever going to be." And something inside her cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, quiet fracture that made it harder to hold herself together. She didn't respond. Couldn't, because anything she said would either confirm his power or reveal how much it still hurt. So she turned, carefully, deliberately, and started to walk away, each step feeling heavier than the last, her ears ringing, her chest tight, her vision fixed on the floor so she wouldn't have to see anyone's reaction. And she almost made it, almost reached the safety of the kitchen doors, when she heard a chair scrape softly behind her, not loud enough to draw attention, but different enough to stand out. And then a voice, calm, controlled, carrying just enough weight to cut through everything else without raising its volume. "Is there a problem here?" It wasn't directed at her, but it stopped her anyway, because there was something about it, something steady, something certain, that made the air shift in a way she couldn't explain. And before she could turn, before she could see who had spoken, the entire moment changed. The man who stood behind her didn't raise his voice or make a scene. Yet the moment he spoke, the energy at the table shifted. Emily turned, her pulse uneven, and found herself facing someone whose presence was quiet but commanding. Tailored suit, steady posture, eyes sharp enough to miss nothing as they settled on Jason. Jason blinked, caught off guard, then scoffed to recover. "No problem here, just talking." But the man stepped closer, calm and unhurried. It didn't sound like a conversation, he said. It sounded like disrespect. One of Jason's friends shifted, sensing the tension, while Jason forced a laugh. "And what you care?" he shot back, irritation creeping in. "This doesn't concern you." The man's gaze didn't move. "It does now." And that simple response carried more weight than any threat. Emily stood frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay, because no one had ever stepped in for her like this before. Jason leaned forward, trying to reclaim control. "You don't know what you're getting into," he warned, but the man tilted his head slightly, unfazed. "I think I do." Then, in a small grounding gesture, he studied Emily's tray as her grip faltered, the brief contact pulling her out of the spiral Jason had dragged her into. "You should go," he said quietly to her. But she didn't move, something holding her there. Jason noticed and snapped. "Don't act like a hero. She's not worth it." The word landed again, heavier this time, and something in the man's expression shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. "Be careful with that word," he said, calm but colder now. Jason smirked, though it lacked confidence. "Or what?" he challenged, leaning in. But instead of arguing, the man reached into his jacket and placed a small black card on the table, the motion smooth and deliberate. "I won't have to," he said. Jason frowned, glancing down in annoyance that quickly turned into confusion, then unease as he read it, his eyes flicking back up, his confidence unraveling. Piece by piece, whatever name was on that card had changed everything, and suddenly the situation was no longer his. "You're going to leave," the man said, not a threat, just a fact. And for the first time, Jason hesitated, looking to his friends for backup, but finding none as they avoided his gaze. Already understanding, he pushed his chair back abruptly, the scrape loud against the floor. "We're done here," he muttered, grabbing his jacket, trying to salvage some dignity, but it was already gone. And within seconds, he and his friends were out the door, the tension dissolving behind them as the restaurant slowly returned to normal, leaving Emily standing there, still processing, as she looked at the black card left behind, and then up at the man who had placed it there, her voice quiet, uncertain, "Who are you?" And he met her gaze with a calm, unreadable expression and replied, "Someone who doesn't tolerate men like him." The restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but for Emily, nothing felt the same. The noise was still there, the clinking glasses, the low conversations, but it no longer drowned her out, no longer made her feel invisible. And as she stood near the counter trying to steady her breathing, she became aware of something unfamiliar settling in her chest. Not fear, not shame, but a quiet sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The man approached her again, unhurried, composed, as if nothing significant had just happened, yet everything about him suggested otherwise. "You're all right," he said, not asking but confirming, and Emily nodded, though she knew it was only partially true. "Thank you," she managed, her voice softer now, more grounded. "You didn't have to do that." He held her gaze for a moment before replying, "Yes, I did." And there was no arrogance in it, just a simple certainty that made it hard to argue. She hesitated before asking, "Why?" "Because people didn't step in. Like that. Not for strangers, not without a reason." But he didn't answer right away, instead glancing briefly toward the door Jason had rushed out of. "Men like him only feel powerful when someone else feels small," he said finally. "I don't allow that where I'm sitting." The words lingered, not dramatic, not forceful, but steady enough to take root. Emily exhaled slowly, processing everything: the humiliation, the interruption, the sudden shift in power, and for the first time, the word asterisk. Worthless asterisk didn't echo the same way in her mind, didn't land as deeply, didn't feel like truth. "I think I've been letting people decide that for me," she admitted quietly, more to herself than to him, but he heard it anyway. "Then stop," he said simply, and something about how easily he said it made it feel possible. Not easy, but possible. He reached into his jacket and handed her a card, similar to the one he had given Jason, black, minimal, deliberate. "If anyone speaks to you like that again," he said, "you call." Emily looked down at it, then back at him. "That feels like a big favor," she said, but he shook his head slightly. "It's not a favor," he replied. "It's a standard." She studied him for a moment, still trying to understand the man who had walked into her worst moment and quietly dismantled it. "You don't seem like someone who's ever been called worthless," she said, and for the first time, something in his expression shifted. Not weakness, not regret, but recognition. "I remember exactly what it feels like," he said, and that was all. No explanation, no story, just enough truth to make her believe him. A small silence settled between them before he stepped back slightly, preparing to leave. "Don't let that word follow you," he added, his voice calm but firm. "It doesn't belong to you." And with that, he turned and walked toward the exit. No hesitation, no need to look back, leaving behind nothing but a quiet absence and a shift she couldn't ignore. Emily stood there for a moment longer, the card still in her hand, the weight of the night settling into something steadier, something stronger, and as she slipped the card into her pocket and straightened her shoulders, she realized the most important thing hadn't been that someone stood up for her. It was that, for the first time in a long time, she was ready to stand up for herself too.